As you probably know by now, as most of us know, on August 27th, there was another school shooting, this time at a Catholic school while a mass was happening. 2 children were shot and 18 others were injured by a transgender person. This is a guy who was pretending to be a woman. And, so now we're talking about this kind of thing again, and we're talking about mental illness. They always talk about mental illness in the news and in the culture when these things happen. Well, let's look at these things from a biblical perspective. We might even talk about ADHD and such like things. We'll talk about it.
Commentary, discussion, Bible teaching, and more with A.K. Richardson.
Please hear and learn. Change your mind.
Now let me
Shift and
bring this up here. By the way, did that was the music even playing in that one? I guess it was. Looks like it was. So now these school shootings, it's always a bad thing. I mean, really, let me get something going here. Really a bad thing. But, well, okay, thanks. I appreciate that. Tax Savage. So, before we get to it, let me just remind everybody that you can check out this podcast on various podcast platforms. Once again, Spotify, you got Amazon, iHeartRadio, so Pandora. So go check it out. Tell everybody about it. You can look me up on Twitter too, A.K. Richardson 2. And of course, if you do watch, or rather listen to the podcast, you could see us live. So you can go to the YouTube channel, look up YouTube, or type in A.K. Richardson, or the URL, youtube.com/A.K. Richardson. You could find the channel, find out when we go live. It's not consistent, as everybody knows. But here we are. All right, so really it's a terrible thing. I mean, it's, children, anytime children are involved, I mean, it really is horrible. So you had Wednesday, you had this person go in and start shooting up a bunch of people during Mass. Two innocent children shot dead. 18 others were injured. Now, we're going to play some clips here. We're going to talk about this from a biblical perspective, and I really want to talk about this concept of mental illness. And we may even, in fact, my plan is to talk about, as it relates to this kind of thing, ADHD. And now that really makes people mad, my views on ADHD, and medicating children. But so we'll get into this. But what I'm interested in seeing this from a biblical perspective. But I'm going to play some things here. We're going to check out the news. So I think everybody knows by now that it is a guy who was transgender. His name was Robert. He legally changed it to Robin. And he was just an evil person. Very cold, very wicked. He had no sympathy, no compassion for anybody. He was completely self-absorbed. And that's what a lot of this comes down to. I'm just going to tell you, is being so self-absorbed, where what you care about is you, yourself, your feelings, your validation. And you're so narcissistic, so selfish, is that you have no love for everybody else. And love grows cold. And we're going to play some Ben Shapiro here. I get a lot of my news from him and other places, but I'm going to play some of him to give us some information here in just a second. But I just got to mention this. What was it I saw the other day? I watched this movie. You ever see that movie Patch Adams? I don't know how much of it is true. And I don't even, Patch Adams. I mean, it's an all right movie. Robin Williams, of course, great actor. And I don't even care all that much for the methods of that particular doctor in that movie. He was a little out there. But if he was just a child doctor, I can understand. But anyway, I'm gonna digress from talking about that. But nevertheless, one thing that came up in that movie, and and maybe it's reality for that real doctor, whoever he is. But in the movie, you know, Robin Williams, he's self-committed to I don't know, what is it, a psycho ward or mental health institution, and because he had suicidal thoughts. And when he started helping his fellow patients, he decided he wants to be a doctor, and he came out and was able to cope with that. And the things he said is, when I was able to help others, I forgot about my own problems. Well, that is reality, even though that's a movie, although it could have been the reality if that part was true for that doctor. But it's very much a reality, in as much as this. When a person gets off of themselves and they are not the center of their own attention all the time, when they're not self-absorbed in their own problems and are able to see others and be interested in others and helping others, boy, that releases a big burden. And so not being self-absorbed goes a long way with people not being depressed and even suicidal. I'm speaking generically here, you know, generally I should say. But yeah, when you're self-absorbed, things become bad. And that's what's happening with these kinds of people. But we're going to talk about that. What I want to do is start with this. I want to pull up Ben Shapiro kind of talking about this. This is from his YouTube channel. He's from the Daily Wire. If you don't know, he's going to talk about this a little bit, and then we'll kind of go from here. So let me know if there's any audio feedback or you can't hear it very well. Let me know.
One of the things that we have now found out about the school shooter, this trans school shooter named Robin. Again, I haven't used the last name because I do not believe that glorifying these shooters or giving a lot of attention to their names is worthwhile. And the reason for that is pretty obvious from the actual guns used by this shooter, which were emblazoned with the names of other school shooters and mass killers. There's a sort of bizarre transmission effect that happens when the media grant enormous attention to evil, mentally ill people who go and shoot a bunch of school children. But one of the factors here is that the transgender shooter, whose name was Robert and then legally changed it to Robin and was a biological male, confessed he was, quote, tired of being trans and wished he had never brainwashed himself in a manifesto posted online before he slaughtered 2 children and wounded 18 more at a Minneapolis church, according to the New York Post. In a twisted handwritten journal he shared on YouTube before the massacre, much of which was encrypted in a homespun code of Russian Cyrillic script and English words.
All right, we'll keep playing that, but I want everybody to take note of that. That was a big part. And this guy left a lot of writing and drawings and material behind. He was very regretful of not waiting till he was older to do all this transitioning, to switch over. He felt brainwashed. And listen, the guy was evil. But it is no mystery there that much is true. And of course, we have this culture of transitioning children, wicked parents supporting the transitioning of their children, surgically modifying them. I mean, it's abominable. Such parents should be in prison. So, but anyway, so one of the things that this shooter, I mean, makes clear is that he really regretted doing this so young, and he blames his mother and all that. But let's keep listening.
He shared on YouTube before the massacre, much of which was encrypted in a homespun code of Russian Cyrillic script and English words. The shooter groaned about his long hair and his decision to transition. Quote, I only keep the long hair because it pretty much is my last shred of being trans. I am tired of being trans. I wish I never brainwashed myself. I can't cut my hair now, as it would be an embarrassing defeat, and it might be a concerning change of character that could get me reported. It just always gets in my way. I will probably chop it on the day of the attack. Okay, there's so many elements here that are astonishing. Okay, number one, the belief that what would have put a red flag up is the removal of the long female-like hair. Right? That's what.
Now that's interesting, but so there he is. This shooter was concerned about looking transgender. He didn't like how he looked ultimately, because let's face it, I mean, being female is not just something that you can just modify externally and become. Being a female is especially not a costume. And even in this case, you can't just modify certain body portions and be a woman. Being a woman is much more than that. Of course, we all understand that. Keep listening.
Believe that what would have put a red flag up is the removal of the long female-like hair. Right? That's what would have thrown up a red flag to the Minnesota authorities, is if a male who had grown his hair out to attempt to look more like a female had cut his hair to look more like a male again. He was afraid that would have actually thrown up a red flag to the authorities who might have said there's something wrong. So there was nothing wrong with a boy saying that he was a girl, his parents signing off on forms to transition him by name. Nothing wrong with that in Minnesota. As we'll get to, that's actually not only upheld in Minnesota, it is celebrated in Minnesota. But if he had decided to detransition, he was afraid that the Minnesota authorities might take a second look at him. Second of all, this was a person who was clearly suffering from gender identity disorder and was not satisfied with the solutions provided by the trans fake medical community. Now, we've been told by that fake medical community the only way to prevent terrible things from happening to and from trans people who are trans identified, is to pretend along with them that they are members of the opposite sex. And in fact,
yeah, and that's going to be a big part of this. What we're going to talk about here is believing a lie. We think about two reasons people believe a lie. Now, that seemed like a strange question, I guess, but that's what a lot about all of that right there. The stuff about a man believing he's a woman and a woman believing she can just be a man, and but especially everybody around them saying, yeah, and then trying to affirm their gender, especially in the case of, with children, it's just diabolical. But it's the choice of believing a lie, believing what is false. It is the ultimate example of people that are opposed to truth.
People who are trans identified, is to pretend along with them that they are members of the opposite sex. And in fact, we are supposed to socially shame people who, quote unquote, detransition. The shooter wrote, quote, "I regret being trans. I wish I was a girl. I just know I cannot achieve that body with the technology."
All right. Another wonderful secret. I don't know if you're a bot or what, but I'm not interested in those comments. Have nothing to do with anything. So let's make that the last one.
We have today. I also can't afford that. He said, "I like feeling sexy and cute, but my face never matches how I feel. I hate my face. Maybe that's why I like furries so much. You can give yourself a new body and face. I want to be that black face mask on Beyonce's body, LMAO." So, was this person just a woman? Because if you listen to the media, the answer is yes. The headline from the New York Times, believe it or not, I mean, this is totally insane. The headline from the New York Times yesterday was, quote, "Minneapolis suspect knew her target, but motive is a mystery." The amount of Orwellian doublespeak here is insane. Totally crazy. So respect the killer's pronouns, preferred pronouns.
Thanks.
But pretend that the motive is a mystery. We know exactly what the motive was because it is spelled out in all of the journals, in the YouTube videos, on the guns themselves. This is not a gigantic mystery wrapped in an enigma. This is the media trying to cover up the reality of the situation, which is a mentally ill person who is not given proper treatment, who is told that his delusions were, in fact, a reflection of the evil patriarchy and a terrible traditional society.
Yes. He was told and affirmed and by the culture, at least that segment of the culture, that, yes, you could be a woman and all this stuff. It really is amazing. Now, I want to think about this. I want to think about this for a second. Now, we're talking about here this concept of transgenderism and how this relates also to mental illness. Let's start here. Transgenderism, I mean, to the reasonable person out there, we're especially when we were first seeing this stuff. Now, wasn't it Dennis Prager on Bill Maher several years ago talking about how people are saying men can have babies, and Bill Maher kind of laughed. Who's saying that? And then look at where we are, of course. It is the ultimate blatant concession and confession of a person to say, I will believe what is false. Not only we start out knowing, yes, it is false, it is not reality, but I'm going to believe it anyway. You know, I can think of two reasons that people believe a lie. Now, the first one is self-evident, right? Because they think it's true. They don't realize that it's a lie. That goes without question. You know, it's an interesting story in the Old Testament of the unnamed prophet. He's not given a name, but he's sent by God to rebuke a king for his idolatry in the Old Testament. And then God tells him, don't stop to eat anywhere. Just go in, get out. That's what God tells him. And this is his prophet. Prophet goes in, rebukes the king, is on his way out. Well, here comes an old prophet. And the old prophet comes and he says, God has told me to tell you to come into my house and eat. And then it says, he lied to him. The old prophet lied to this other prophet, saying that God had told him something he didn't. And the unnamed prophet believed and goes in, and then he was rebuked by God. I think it was an angel that was sent and said, you were told not to do this. Well, anyway, here comes a lion and kills him. Doesn't mean he was condemned as lost or something, but it just means he was punished for believing a lie. He was specifically told by God, don't do this. Someone came and said, well, God changed his mind. Well, he obviously believed that it was true, you know. So, I mean, that example came to my mind, but that's the most obvious reason people believe lies. And most of us say, and I do believe that we don't want to believe something that is false. I certainly don't. That's my religious attitude. That's why I open people to challenge me on these biblical topics and issues, because I don't want to believe what is not true. But sometimes we do, right? Sometimes we believe things that are false because we think they're true. That's self-evident. But you know, the second reason people believe a lie is because they want to believe it. I mean, that's pretty simple and self-evident too. I remember a long time ago watching, you know, this Dr. Phil episode for whatever reason, and it was a catfishing scam where this older woman had been scammed online by somebody or some people that were saying that it was this guy that was interested in her, you know, send the pictures, coaxes her into keep sending him money, and yeah, we're going to meet, and just keeps, I mean, it just becomes this absurd scam where, I mean, but these women, man, they just keep forking over, sometimes like their life savings to this person on the internet that says they're in love with them, and, you know, and says, well, we're just going to keep meeting. I just got to have this. You just got to send me this money. And so they keep telling her all the obvious signs and indications and contradictions that this was obviously not a real person. But she just refused. No, I believe, I've talked to him. I believe. Just on and on, they gave her this undeniable evidence because it was obvious that this was not a real man, that the picture was not real. The guy was pretending to be Brad Pitt. Yeah, that's definitely believable, you know. And she just kept saying, she just kept holding on to it. And you think, why in the world does she just keep denying the obvious? It's because she wants to believe it. Now, I believe such a person in that situation, and there's many like this, they know it's false. They know it's true, but they want to believe it. So Tax Savage says, the guy was pretending to be Brad Pitt. She thought Brad Pitt was really in love with her. Yeah, so I'm not sure that the one I saw was Brad Pitt, but there's many like that. And yes, Brad Pitt. I mean, who wouldn't believe that? Yes, Brad Pitt's in love with me. How about it? But you see, it's because people want to believe it. And I have no problem. It's not hard for me to understand that in cases like this, people know, at least at some point, that yes, this is not real, but they want it to be real, so they choose. I do believe people can make a choice to believe what they know is a lie. And that's not good. Because when you set your heart against it, and that's what it is, it means it's not reality, it's not truth. So I'm going to believe that which is false. You're in a dangerous situation. Now, what does the Bible say about this kind of thing? It talks about people who are like this. And I'm going to read a few passages kind of like this. And this relates to mental health. But let me start here. I mean, so the transgenderism is the ultimate example of this, right? People know. Now, I'm not talking about children, obviously. But people know that you cannot be a man if you're really a woman. Now, am I saying that there aren't people who actually come to believe this? No, I think that would be few and far between, the actual people who really, truly are convinced that they really are what a woman is. I think they just say it. They will always say, I really am a woman. I am a woman. I think really they know they're not. But I do believe, as I just said, that there are people who can become convinced, even though they originally know that I believe people can choose to believe a lie, and I believe what happens is the heart, once it's set on falsehood, and the deeper you go into that, the more there are consequences. And one of the consequences is becoming what the Bible calls your heart being darkened. And that's what transgenderism. It's saying I really am a woman when you know you're not, and you live that way and you present you that way. But this is especially true. Everybody in the culture, if you want to affirm what is false for other people, you aid them in their deception. You too are loving a lie. You are setting your heart against reality. That means you're all up. You open the door for just embracing falsehood, and that hardens hearts. And that's transgenderism is just the epitome of that, of embracing what is clearly and unquestionably false. Now, other things like homosexuality, I believe it's also embracing things that are false. There's a gay gene, I'm born this way, this is okay. But I think those things are more subtle. I mean, there's more room to convince yourself. Now, I do believe the very fact that I think nature itself tells us the truth on those things. So I do believe that's self-evident too. Well, how do you know that they are not? How do you know that God is not okay with it? Well, because how do you know it's not natural or this, that, and the other? Yeah, because the plumbing is incompatible. That's how I know. It's all embracing a falsehood, but I think there's more room with that to convince yourself and use gay genes, because people can actually, for whatever reason you want to debate it, people do, and it is obvious that they do. People do develop these unnatural desires for the same gender. They are twisted desires, and I think they come that way for a variety of reasons, not because they're born that way. But setting that aside, but even more so with transgender, it is so self-evident that it was hard for them to get it off the ground. I mean, it took a lot of work to increase this narrative that I really am a woman when it's a man, and it's a man, I'm really a man when it's a woman, that kind of thing. It was really hard to do. So this was the epitome of it. People saying you really am. Matthew Hatchett says, once you lose the truth, you'll believe anything. That's the essence of what I'm talking about. Once you set your heart against the truth, once you stop caring about truth, something that is so obviously true, you will believe anything. I think is exactly right. Eduardo Sanchez says, what you're describing is the very same issue that exists in religion and as a consequence creates sex. I believe there's truth to that. Yeah, the devil is called the father of lies, so there are definitely elements of truth to this. Now, this relates to what we're talking about here, and I got other things I'm going to look at here. But what is mental illness? And what are we to think about this from a biblical perspective? And this is very much connected here, because this is what they're calling mental illness. Well, so from a biblical perspective, the Bible doesn't know the term mental illness, and a lot of this will depend on how a person defines mental illness. And so, like I said, that is important. I'm just going to repeat that. A lot of it will have to do with how you define it. But here's the truth that I think we can glean from the Bible. Generally, the Bible talks about people being evil and their hearts growing hard, which just means the heart is the mind. It talks about people becoming callous. The King James will say past feeling. We'll look at that passage. Well, let's start with one. Let's start with something here. And then we'll keep commenting. So Ephesians 4, which is that passage, Paul talking to the Christians here, he says, therefore this I say and testify in the Lord, that you walk no longer. Now they were Gentiles. I mean, they still were, but they were non-Christian Gentiles. They lived in a heathen culture before. He's saying that you no longer walk. It's a biblical idiom. I mean, there's times when walking is literal, but many times this concept like here, walking is a biblical idiom. It's the way they spoke for your conduct, how you lived, your routine. It says that you walk no longer just as the Gentiles, the nations, that's what that word means, the nations around you also walk, in the futility of their mind. You know what he's saying? In the emptiness, in the purposelessness, in the meaninglessness, the vanity of their mind. He said, don't walk in it. In other words, the way you think and how you think directs everything you do in life. How you live is according to how you think. Your goals, your interests, what you think is right, your judgments, your discernments, that kind of thing. And what he's saying is they walk in meaningless. There's no ultimate goal for them. They're just chasing appetite and pleasure. They become self-absorbed, and that's the situation here. You become self-absorbed where you have no care and concern for others. That's what he says. Well, this is a human principle. This is the same thing. People, when they're not living for Christ and for God, and in light of the fact that they have a creator, using moral judgment, what happens is their life, their conduct, their whole mindset is purposelessness. And this is very much the case today, more so than it ever has been. You know why? Because of the teaching of evolution. If all we are, and this is what is taught to children, is an advanced amoeba, there is no ultimate purpose and meaning, which that's just the reality of it. That is the truth of it. If we just, by randomness and blind nature developed from organisms in the water, then it really takes away the ultimate meaning of life. And that's just the way it is. Very much so. I mean, besides that, when your pleasures, your appetites become your goals in life, where these men and women are so interested in wanting to be what they're not that they have surgeries. They spend money on surgeries, and it makes them miserable and have to take medication for the rest of their life. I mean, they just become self-absorbed in their own pleasures, appetites, and interests that become meaninglessness. But let me keep reading. That you walk no longer just as the Gentiles also walk in the futility of their mind, being darkened in their mind, alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them. Light and darkness is very idiomatic in the New Testament, in the Bible, for truth and being able to see and to know and judgment. The very fact that they are darkened in their mind means that they're not able to see. They become blind. They live out with meaningless, their whole thoughts ultimately do them no good. And the more they do that, the more a person does that, the less and less they're able to even evaluate and see the perspective, not able to step outside of themselves, look and evaluate and say, wait a minute, this all here, if you study this guy, did this, and as we were reading from or watching and listening to Ben Shapiro, this guy he hated the situation he was in. He hated where he was. He hated that he wasn't really a woman. He knows that. Didn't like the way he looked. Didn't look like a real woman. It was just in a miserable condition. Everything he was doing and invested himself in became meaninglessness and wasn't serving any purpose. And if he hadn't been so self-absorbed in the first place, he wouldn't be there. And if he had stopped being self-absorbed, even later, he wouldn't have done what he did. Now, how does that lead to him shooting innocent people? Well, because he has no concern or care. He just wants to send some kind of message. Look at my wrath. Look at my anger. Look at how frustrated I am, because he was self-absorbed. And he wasn't able to see, man, I just got to get out of this. I mean, I could live a meaningful life, and I can do good and be a good person. I can find satisfaction and goals and purposes. I just got to get away from this baloney. But he's not able to see that. His mind becomes darkened. You know, when you see, I don't know, I did a video on a transgender shooter. The last one I did, the last time we had a transgender shooter, and YouTube yanked the video. But that's unfortunate. But I just lost the thought I just had. They're not able to see, though. That's what is being said here. They're not able to see. Oh, I know what I was going to say. When you see in these parades, these gay parades, these people marching in the most embarrassing of ways, and the way they present themselves, and it's so embarrassing, but they can't see it. And it really is. It's just the nature of it. And they just cannot see how embarrassed they should be. And this guy wasn't able to see and feel compassion and sympathy. They become darkened and can't see. But it says, being darkened in their mind, alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance. Now, people start out ignorant as children, and they're not taught by parents that know any good, and they're not educated and not only taught information, but given examples in their life to teach them. And so it just becomes worse and worse. Because of the hardness of their heart and they having become callous. That is what has happened to this guy. Having given themselves over to sensuality for the practice of every kind of impurity with greediness. Now, this is what I know about mental illness. I'm not big on the term mental illness. I think it's a very nebulous concept. We call things, ADHD is one of those. We call mental illness. What is a mental illness? It's not like a physical illness where you could see something wrong with the physical structure of your body. ADHD is one of them. There's nothing we could see in the body that says, here's the problem. The best of what they've got with ADHD, which we'll talk about more here in a second, is they see things in brain scans, which are also ambiguous, as they themselves will say, if you research it. Not everybody's on board with the whole brainwaves and how to interpret it. The brainwaves, by the way, don't tell you whether what you're seeing is the cause or the symptom. That's about the best they got. But they can't open your skull. They can't look in your blood. They can't look at your cells. They can't examine the physics and say, oh, he's got a disease. He's got a problem. Because mental illness is just that. It's just something wrong with how they're thinking. The Bible doesn't use the term. And so I'm not big on the term because it's one of those concepts that is a nebulous. It's hard to nail down. Disorders of the mind. Well, if you're not thinking properly, okay, well, we call that other things. The Bible calls people that are evil, that are hard heart. You know what a hard heart is? It is a heart that can't feel. It can't feel compassion. It can't feel, that's why it's hard, that's the point. How do people get that way? Well, they got a mental or disorder. Yeah, the Bible just says that they're evil. And the reason they get that way is a variety of reasons. One of these things, well, like this passage tells us, that it can be developed. And let me get to that right now. So this happens because people persist in an improper way of thinking, a bad way of thinking, an evil way of thinking. And when we do that more and more, it becomes easier and easier, and it becomes who we are. Character starts to develop. Eventually, character becomes solidified and locked in. You know why? Think about this. I want everybody to think about this. It is self-evident, but God designed the human body, especially the brain. And, of course, from a Christian perspective, we are not a body with a spirit. We are a spirit with a body. And the brain, of course, is how we connect to the real world. And by the way, let me make some things clear, because in case you don't know what I'm saying. Obviously, I do believe that if there's something wrong with your brain, there's going to be something wrong with your mind. Alzheimer's, if you get hit in the head, if your brain is injured, because your brain is how your spirit connects to the real world. But a lot of times we're talking about mental illness, we're not talking about things we could see wrong with the brain. ADHD is one of those. They say it's genetic. I'm about to show you. But it's not genetic. That's a lie. But the point is, and by the way, don't interpret me to say that ADHD is fake. But we're going to get into all that. But the truth is that God designed the human mind as it works with the brain to learn and to set in repeated patterns of behavior and thought so that they don't have to be relearned all the time. This is how we are by nature. The more you do something, the more you do it automatically, and it becomes what we call second nature. So in heating and cooling, you know, I use that example. I don't have to relearn how the refrigeration system works or air conditioner. Now, I'm always learning, but I don't have to relearn the trade every time. Brazing, when I'm brazing copper, you know, I don't have to. I remember the first time I brazed copper, I was very nervous. I was going to melt it. I wasn't quite sure. Now it's like I don't have to think about it. You just go in there. I know how to set the flame. I know where to put the filler. I mean, I just know it comes automatically. The same with driving. Driving is a great example. I mean, when you learn to drive, you're very nervous, very clumsy. You got to put a lot of thought into it. I remember when I was learning to drive, I was driving with my dad. I was driving, and we were on the way. We wanted to stop at the pharmacy. It was one of those old those antique Silverados. And I just had much experience. Did it a couple times. So I'm driving. Of course, that Silverado had the gear shift up here. And the pharmacy's coming up. We're going about 50, 45, 50. Cars behind me. And the pharmacy's coming up on the left, and he says, put your blinker on. Well, just lack of experience, a little bit of nervousness, you know. So instead of going for the blinker, I hit the gear shift to go left, you know, to put my left blinker on. And when I did it, it shoved it into reverse. And the whole truck just locks up, tires are screeching, cars behind me are locking their brakes so they don't hit me. We jettisoned forward nearly. Everything turned out ultimately okay, but it was quite an experience. Lack of experience. But you know, you learn to drive, you don't even have to think about it. You get in, you know what to do, you're not nervous. It's just the way that it is because it sets in. The more and more you do something, the more it sets in. That's the human design. So that is really the problem. You know, the more you do something, the more it becomes habit becomes character, and it locks in. The more a person persist in their addictions, the harder it becomes to come out of it. Now, I do believe things can be reversed, but once you're in it, you have to do the opposite. You got to do it so much in reverse that it becomes set in not to do it. It takes work. The more and more we persist in not caring about others, not thinking about others, ignoring compassion and sympathy, especially if you grow up that way or the environment and the people around you do that, the more hard your heart grows. Now, we keep calling it mental illness. That's because a lot of this comes down to the fact that our educational system and our medical system and our culture and society thinks that humans are nothing but physical creatures. We don't think about evil and good. It's just about what's wrong with the system. So that's where a lot of this mental illness comes from. But really what it is just people who persist in that which is evil and in hate and indifference towards others, and it becomes who they are. And the more they persist in stuff like this transgenderism, the more they love that which is false, the more all bets are off when it comes to what they'll do. That's what it says here, having become callous. And that's definitely what he is. He was planning this, how he would shoot up these kids. I mean, completely callous. It was just gone. There was no sympathy or compassion for them. The point is not this is because he was a transgender. The transgenderism was a part of a problem of him persisting in that which is evil, persisting in that which is an embracement of what is false. And more you do it, the more you become hard, the more callous you become. So while the rest of the culture keeps talking about mental illness, when you can't define what that is because you can't look at the mind, I'm just going to keep saying, no, they're evil. They are people that grow cold. Bible language, or just the idea that they do not learn to love. They become self-absorbed. And listen, that's what he was. He was self-absorbed, venting his frustration, showing how miserable he had become. He thought it was all about him. That's why I reference back to that line from that movie from Patch Adams. When he stopped caring, or when he started helping others, he stopped caring about his own problems. Simply meaning that he wasn't self-absorbed and he wasn't miserable anymore. When you're at the point, a lot of our transgender friends out there have to be affirmed by other people. You have to affirm my gender. They're just so self-absorbed. My vindication is how I feel about myself is dependent upon what others will say to me. Me. Okay, in Romans chapter 1, let me talk about this. This is very similar. Now, you notice what a lot of what we're talking about, and a lot of the problems in our culture come down to something. It's sexual deviation. Now, I'm going to be talking about some things a little explicitly here. So if you got young children watching live or whatever, you're watching this later, I'm just warning you ahead of time. Some of this is going to be explicit. And so, some statements anyway. And so, just be aware of that if you have children. So, I'm going to play this clip. This is some time ago. This is an atheist. And I thought about this clip because I thought about, now here's one of the well-known atheists today. I don't know why. I think he's overestimated. His name's Sam Harris. People just like the way he talks. He just always talks in such a way that people really like to listen to, and that's really the only thing he's good for. I haven't heard him say anything profound, but I have heard him make foolish statements like this. Well, he's an atheist. He's talking to other atheists, and he was talking about God. Of course, he doesn't believe in him, but he's going to say this, where he makes this little crack here. And when you analyze what he's saying and the truth about it, he's just foolish. And I don't mean that in a derogatory sense, like a name calling. I believe that he is just being foolish.
Attend to, but he's a neighbors believe in, because the God that our neighbors believe in is essentially an invisible person. He is a creator deity who created the universe to have a relationship with one species of primate. Lucky us. and he's got galaxy upon galaxy to attend to. But he's especially concerned with what we do, and he's especially concerned with what we do while naked. And he almost certainly disapproves of homosexuality. And he's created this cosmos as a vast laboratory.
So that little crack there... Okay, theology matters. I'll talk about that here in just a second. Chemical imbalances. That little crack there about, when you're talking to that audience, of course, oh, that's real funny. God is especially concerned with what we do naked. Now I want you to think about the foolishness of that statement. Well, do you know why there is such a concern about sexual behavior? This goes back to the point I was just about to get into. Think about how much problems in culture and society arise from sexual deviation. From sexual deviation. Look at how absurd, ridiculous, and problematic this transgenderism becomes. It's sexual deviation. Homosexuality, sexual deviation. Think about broken homes with, forget about homosexuality, heterosexuals, but having affairs and having and sleeping with people that you're not married to and having children raised in broken homes. Look how problematic. Just look at the statistics about how society breaks down with broken homes. And that comes from sexual deviation, sleeping with people that you're not married to, or being married but not having babies elsewhere. Homosexuality. Think about millions of babies are being murdered, abortion, because people want to have sex without consequences. That's the main reason. They don't want to have babies and the responsibilities. They don't care about the children. They care about their self-absorbed still yet. They want to have babies, or rather they want to have sex without consequences. Pornography is a poison. It is a huge poison that pulls many a man into it. Objectifies women, treats them like objects of entertainment. They do that to themselves in large numbers. A community full of diseases. Think about the diseases that come from homosexualities in the past. How much problems of culture and society stem from sexual deviation? It's easy to make a bunch of atheists crack. God is so concerned with what you do naked. God knows what is good and best, and he knows what you're doing sexually that's not good has a lot of bad consequences. God's smarter than we are. He's most certainly smarter than Sam Harris. But this is an example where someone becomes blind. They can't see that they're not going to outsmart God. God is smarter than he is. Of course, he's rejecting the idea of God in the first place, and so that's why he doesn't get all this. How much problems of society stem from sexual deviation? Well, in Genesis and Romans 1, talking about people that could see the truth of God in nature, and people can, I believe. We're just going to start here. They committed idolatry. It says in verse 24, therefore God gave them over in the lust of their hearts to impurity, so that their bodies would be dishonored among them. For they exchanged the truth of God for a lie. There it is. Now this is dealing with homosexuality. People rejected the truth of God, were slave to their they let their appetites and interests. When you don't rein in your interests and appetites, your appetites can become uncontrolled. They can go into boundaries that are not proper, and before you know it, you're in a very confused and embarrassing state. And you don't even realize it. They let their sexual passions run amok to the point where we commit homosexuality, having sex with people of the same gender. That's how much they've let it spring out. And the situation they're in, this becomes a corrupted thing. But it says God gave them over. In other words, there's a point where God said, I'm not going to restrain you. If that's the path you choose, then that's the path you will get. God gave them over in the lust of their hearts. In other words, that becomes your master, then your master you will obey. To impurity, so that their bodies would... And homosexuality is a dishonoring of the body. It really is. For they exchanged the truth of God for a lie. That's what people want to do. They want to replace the truth with the lie. That's the very essence of transgenderism. Verse 26, for this reason God gave them over to dishonorable passions. You look at what they're doing in the gay pride parades, it should be embarrassing to them how shameful it is, but they can't see it because they're blind. They've been given over. For their females exchanged. Now, I do have to say, this does not mean the gospel is very powerful. You can see the error of your way, come out of it, go back to God and be healed and be forgiven. And I'm not saying these people can't be saved. Dishonorable passions for their females exchanged. All right. I'm going to hide somebody. Okay. So, for their females exchanged the natural function for that which is unnatural. Like I said, It's self-evident that people are not meant and designed and born to be having sex with the same gender. How do you know that? Well, because the parts don't work. The plumbing doesn't match. That's how I know. Burned in their, see, and in the same way also the males abandon the natural function of the female and burn in their desire towards one another, males with males committing indecent acts and receiving in their own person the due penalty of their error. And just as they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them over to an unfit mind. That is what is happening to people. Now, one more passage to look at here. 2 Thessalonians, talking about the man of lawlessness. I don't want to get into here what that is and all that. Just one portion of this I want to look at. He talks about the man of lawlessness, different theories about what that is, but he talks about this. The Lord in verse 8, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 8, it says, the Lord will slay this man of lawlessness with the breath of his mouth and will bring him to an end by the appearing of his coming. Again, setting aside exactly what that is, whose coming is in accord with the working of Satan with all power and signs and false wonders, and with all the deception of unrighteousness for those who perish because they did not receive a love for the truth so as to be saved. And for this reason, God sends upon them a deluding influence so that they will believe what is false, in order that they all may be judged who do not believe the truth, but took pleasure in unrighteousness. Now, whatever is being said about whatever specific people, this is a principle that I do believe applies generally. There are people who reject the truth. Righteousness here is that which is right, as opposed to that which is false. They reject because they don't like what is true, what is reality. They want that which is false. They choose to believe it. And because they want to believe it, God helps them believe what is false. He sends them good reason. I think evolution has been one of those things. For people who really want something to grab a hold, some straws to grasp to reject God, God had somebody come up with this, what originally was natural selection. And I do believe there's some truth to that. And they took it to this, well, okay, so evolution, we all evolved from apes and all this kind of thing. And people came up with a reason to believe what is false. They take pleasure in unrighteousness. That's what all this is about. So, when people choose to believe a lie, and when people take pleasure in unrighteousness, eventually, and if you continue to be evil and to reject that which is good and proper, you become more hardened, more darkened. That's what people become. So I reject the mental illness. I mean, I'm not saying people can't use it. I'm saying, here's what I know. People become evil. People become calloused. They become locked into that which is evil. And I believe only the gospel can bring them out. I don't look at them. Here's the point. We tend to use the terminology of mental illness to look at them as if they're just sick. You know, pedophiles will say, well, that person is sick. No, he's not sick. He's not sick. If a person can rape little children, little toddlers and infants, he's not sick. He's wicked. He's calloused and self-absorbed. He's evil. He's made so many persistent choices in his life that this is where he's become. He's not sick. He's just wicked. He's evil, which is the term for people that their character is bent upon that which is contrary to what is good and right. That's what we're talking about. Now, that simplifies it for me. That's what the Bible understands. Now, some people talk about demonization. Well, can these people be possessed by demons? Well, when I see demon possession in the New Testament, most of them don't look like this kind of thing. This person seemed to be in control of what he was doing. He was just evil. Most demon possessions is really odd and frantic behavior, fighting with yourself, throwing yourself into a fire. The Bible just simply doesn't give us enough information about demon possessions for me to say, yeah, there's demon possessions. So that's the reality of it. I believe you could have a conversation about demon possession. First of all, you got to have the discussion whether it even continues. But I know I don't see this kind of person who seemed to making deliberate choices, seemed to be very much in control of his choices. I don't think he was possessed or a devil was in him. Now, that's not to say demons can't be behind these things, but that the people are evil. Tax Savage says calling a pedophile sick is an insult to real sick people. That's exactly right. No, you can be sick. And if you're sick, you can't really be blamed, right? Isn't that exactly what Tax Savage is saying? Yeah, we don't want to hold sick people as guilty. Look at you for being sick. No, these people are evil. Yeah. Now, so I believe there are diseases and there's things that can happen to the brain, and only God knows how he's going to look at somebody. If a righteous a person, were to get and develop Alzheimer's later in their life and they think and act in bad ways, I'll leave it to God. I mean, and my opinion is that he's going to judge the person according to how they were before they developed it, that kind of situation. But a lot of this so-called mental illness is just fake. It's not real. I mean, there's nothing to look at as far as an illness in the mind. Now, here's what I want to do. I want to use ADHD as an example. Now, let's talk about that. And really, this is just to use as an example of what I'm talking about. But let me say this, and this is factual. ADHD is not a disease. You've probably been told otherwise. We have been told otherwise for decades. It's not a real disease. Now, I did not say ADHD is not real, because that would depend on how you define real. Now, the things that people struggle with and fight with as far as behaviors, or that are even found in children that we call ADHD, and can be difficult behaviors, well, these behaviors are real. So the thing we call ADHD, I mean, it's a real thing that's happening with behavior and become difficult, but it's not a disease, and that is a fact. It don't take much research to show that, by the way. I don't even know that. I think they're starting to go away from calling it a disease. As I've been looking at websites, and I got plenty here, I don't even see them using that language anymore. They like to say it's genetic, but then you investigate a little more, and what you're going to see is, yeah, we don't really know where the genes are. And so the essence of what I'm talking about here with ADHD is just to say this. Mental illness is a concept that is somewhat ambiguous. We talk about these things as if they're sicknesses and diseases, and when you do that, you start treating yourself or others or your children as sick, when they're not really sick. Now, there may be problems to be fixed, but it's not a sickness. And my biggest problem with the ADHD is the medication and the medicating of children. I mean, even when I was in school, I had fellow students, hey, teacher, I got to take my ADHD pills. And so we're giving them Ritalin or whatever it is. Medicating of children, I think, is horrible. Now, I'm not saying we're talking about bad parents here, of course. We're talking about parents that are trying to do the proper thing, but that have been led to believe a bunch of false things by the medical community for many decades. So I'm not saying you're a bad parent if you medicate your child. I'm saying I think you're doing what isn't helpful and what isn't good because you're trying to do the right thing, but you've been taught the wrong thing by a bunch of people with degrees. Let me look at some stuff here. Now, first of all, think about it. How many millions of children are diagnosed with this? Really? Is it that big of a problem? Wasn't that big of a problem the further back you go? You go back to schools the way they were in the 50s, and it starts to wear off about the 60s, where teachers usually had control over most of their students. These days, I mean, it's just horrible. And then this disease just sprung up. Why wasn't it that big of a problem before? Oh, well, in that case, because we didn't know what it was. No, but I mean, the behavior would have still been there, would it not have been? I get it, you didn't know what it was called, but the youth and the children just weren't that problematic as they were. And then all of a sudden, we got so much problem with them. My child's all over the place, this kind of thing. And how widespread that is? Where did that come from? Now, we know that ADHD and the type of mental illness like this is a lucrative business. You know how much money? This is like one of the number one diseases we have for children. I mean, just the medicating of children, how much money the pharmaceutical companies make. Okay. Tax Savage says, I've heard it blamed on all things put in our food, vaccines nowadays. I believe those things could very well be a part of it. Now, what I'm trying to show you is it's not a sickness. It's most certainly not a gene. I want to pull up some things here. Now, here's the thing. I don't have time to go into this, so let's pull some stuff over here. Let me say it like this. I think it comes from very well could be these kinds of things too. Our food, what we're doing. Think about the increase of children on screens, telephones, and scrolling and being on, how children become addicted to the screens and games and entertainment on Nintendo all the time. Our culture and our world, especially children these days, is just so quick. It's constant, instant gratification, instant thing. Yeah, we got terrible food, yes, vaccines, and children naturally are fidgety, do not focus. All these things that we call ADHD are just natural, but they are aggravated by things in the environment. That's my belief. And they're not taught to focus and control themselves. And it becomes a constant behavior. And you're an adult and you said you got ADHD and you said, well, I believe it because I have trouble. That's because you didn't fix these things over time. And it's very hard to do once you're an adult, especially. And treating people, especially children, like they're sick, then it's no longer a behavior to fix. It's a behavior to medicate. Okay, now here's from psychiatry.org. Now this is, yeah. Okay. I just want to look at a few things here. Now I know the typing is a little, I'll try to get out of the way. Look at this. And all that it says here, I just want to zero in on a few points. The causes of ADHD. Scientists have not yet identified the specific causes of ADHD. So it's not a gene. You know why they say they have identified a specific cause? Because they can't find a gene. Now they will say, while there is growing evidence that genetics contribute to ADHD and several genes have been linked to the disorder, no specific gene or gene combination has been identified as the cause of the disorder. Now, I want you to notice what they say, though. Growing evidence. When in medical studies and material and scientific studies, things like growing evidence means they can't say it's a fact. They don't say there's growing evidence of gravity. There's not growing evidence of cells and problems in the brain with Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, because those things they can find. But when they say growing evidence that genetics contribute, it means they're not certain, but it keeps looking more and more like that. That means these aren't facts. That's what that means. Now, they will say, well, we find genes linked. You'll read other material that says, well, but there's some debate on the linkage and exactly what it means. That's what it is about. There's no facts. Let me tell you something about ADHD. Do you know, if you don't know, you probably do because it's so widespread, especially if you got a child that's been diagnosed with ADHD. Do you know how they diagnose them? What they don't do is take a blood sample and examine your blood cells. They don't do anything like that. No, you know why they can't do something like that? Because it doesn't show up in the physics. There is no physical thing they can look at. I told you the best of what they can cite is brain scans, but all they see is brain waves and darkened areas. But that doesn't tell you that that's the cause. First of all, they have to eliminate it as a symptom. In other words, it's the behavior. They cannot eliminate the fact or the possibility that the behavior has caused the brain imaging. That whatever spots or darkened areas in the brain could very well be the result of the persistent patterns of behavior. So symptom cause, that kind of thing. One of the other things people say is, no, when you give them medication, they can focus. Yeah, you give, if you give opium to somebody, they're going to relax. Drugs affect the brain no matter what you have wrong with you. You don't have to have something wrong with you for a drug to affect your focus. If the drug is designed to stimulate the parts of the brain that enhance focus and alertness, then whether you got a disease or not, it's going to have that effect. So this so-called mental disorder, I think ADHD is a great example where so much of this is just mythical. Let's see here. This is a great article. Now, I first saw this, Matt Walsh talking about this. This comes from University of Central Florida. Notice the title here. It's from 2017. Notice this. Lukewarm No More says ADHD was huge in 70s and 80s, and there want one cell phone or computer around. Yeah, well, I certainly don't believe it's that, but it's been increasing since the 60s, which is when psychiatrists and people with degrees started telling us not only to medicate children that behave this way, but that it was a sickness, so you couldn't try to train them out of it, that kind of thing. Tax Savage says, you're right about that. The rise in the popularity of things like TikTok or these short clips like kids will just scroll through mindlessly. Exactly right. I can't for the life of me understand the appeal. Yeah, me either. Or maybe Lukewarm was saying it was not huge in the 70s and 80s. Okay, but anyway, now notice the title here. ADHD kids can be still if they're not straining their brains. Now, this is just so absurd. And this is the absurdity of seeing a thing as a sickness when it really isn't a physical sickness. The essence of what they're saying, if you don't know, if you're not familiar yet, but you're going to see, is that they're saying, well, you know, kids with ADHD have trouble focusing, alertness, and what they're ultimately saying is, guess what? They can be still when they're not bored. They can be still when they're being entertained. Now notice, I'm going to read some of this. Let's see if I can play this. I hope they don't give me an ad. Now, what you're seeing here is this 10-minute experiment that was done on this boy. In the left video, he was looking at a video about math. In the right video, he was looking at a video of a podcast from Star Wars. Not a podcast, what is that, pod racing? Isn't that what it is? From Star Wars. And they're saying, look, when he's watching Star Wars, this ADHD kid can control himself. And in the math video, look, his ADHD acts up. They're saying the reason is because ADHD they have trouble using the parts of the brain to focus. No, you fools, it's called he's bored. This is called being a child. Brings new meaning to the professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. That's exactly what they are. Now, because I want to read this, and I'm trying to bring this to a close around 4:30. It says, how's this for exasperating? Your ADHD child fidgets and squirms his way through school and homework, but seems laser-focused and motionless sitting in front of the TV watching an action thriller. Well, fret not, because new research shows lack of motivation or boredom with school isn't to blame. No, it's not that he's bored. That's not the problem, really, although it really is. For the differing behavior, it turns out that symptoms of attention deficit hyperactivity disorders, such as fidgeting, foot tapping, and chair swiveling. Yeah, that's yours truly here. Are triggered by cognitively demanding tasks. And so what is the implication here? Don't make them do these things that would make them think. Like learning math, like school or homework. But movies and video games don't typically require brain strain. In other words, don't make you bored is what it means. They entertain you instead. So the excessive movement doesn't manifest. I could have told on that. I need no research. When a parent or teacher sees a child, this is a quote, when a parent or teacher sees a child who can sit perfectly still in one condition, and yet over here they're all over the place, the first thing they say is, well, they could sit still if they wanted to. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good conclusion. Says Marcus Rapport, director of the Children's Learning Clinic at the University of Central Florida. But kids with ADHD only need to move when they are accessing their brain's executive functions. That movement helps them maintain alertness. Let's see. Professor, recently published in the Journal of Abnormal Child Psychology, Professor Rapport's senior doctoral student Sarah Orban and research team tested 62 boys ages 8 to 12. Of those, 32 had ADHD. 30 did not have ADHD and acted as a control group. During separate sessions, the children watched 2 short videos, each about 10 minutes long. One was a scene from Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, in which a young Anakin Skywalker competes in a dramatic pod race. The other was an instructional video featuring an instructor verbally and visually presenting multi-step solutions to addition, subtraction, and multiplication problems. While watching, the participants were observed by a researcher, recorded and outfitted with wearable actigraphs that tracked their slightest movements. You couldn't just watch? Okay, but anyway, the children with ADHD were largely motionless while watching the Star Wars clip. Huge surprise there, right? But during the math video, they swiveled in their chairs, frequently changed positions, and tapped their feet. This may not seem surprising. I would say not. After all, weren't the children absorbed by the sci-fi movie and bored by the math lesson? Not so, our smart guy says. That's just using the outcome to explain the cause. It's not just the outcome. It is human experience. As age as humans are, we've seen this. This is obvious behavior. We have shown that what's really going on, in my computations, I added that part, is that it depends on the cognitive demands of the task. With the action movie, there's no thinking involved. Surely not. I added that part if you're just listening. You're just viewing it, using your senses. I'm reading again. You don't have to hold anything in your brain and analyze it. With the math video, they're using their working memory, and in that condition, movement helps them to be more focused. The takeaway, parents and teachers of children with ADHD should avoid labeling them as unmotivated slackers when they're working on tasks that require working memory and cognitive processing. Researchers say, what a bunch of fools. I mean, honestly, a bunch of ignorant fools who bought into a bunch of nonsense and just reconfirming their nonsense. This is childhood behavior. Now, this is why I go back to. Now, let's look at how do you diagnose ADHD? This is from myclevelandclinic.org. How doctors diagnose ADHD. This is an article entitled ADHD. What is, ADHD? Okay. Diagnosis. Healthcare providers diagnose ADHD based upon their presence and absence of certain symptoms. They use the criteria listed in the diagnostic manual. That's the big one. That's what they use. Your children will receive an ADHD diagnosis if all the following are true. Your child has at least 6 symptoms from one group: inattention or hyperactivity impulsivity. Or they have at least 6 symptoms from each group. Okay, what are they? Well, it says identify clusters of behaviors related to attention and activity, rule out alternative clusters. So they have to do these 3 things. Identify clusters of behavior related to attention and activity, Rule out alternative causes of these behaviors like depression or anxiety. Now, how in the world did they do that? Confirm the presence of any co-occurring condition. Okay, all this boils down to one thing. The way they diagnosed you is by a list of things like they can't focus for a long period of time. They fidget in their chair. They can't focus on a conversation. It's these kinds of things. That is typical childhood activity. So they don't take your blood. All they got to do is hear a parent, because the child, they don't do it with the child, hear the parent or teacher say, he can't focus, he can't sit still, he has trouble maintaining a long conversation, this kind of thing. These kinds of typical childhood behavior, and they say, got ADHD, and opens the pathway to medication. This is the problem with the whole mental disorder issue. It's a bunch of falsehood. Now, you say, well, AK, you said all this about what it is, and how do we really deal with ADHD? Well, my point really isn't about ADHD. It's using it as an example of the problem with labeling something as mental illness. And by the way, I'm not telling you to stop medicating your children, because I don't know what your children are doing or what they're taking. I mean, you got to discuss that. But in general, I'm telling you, medicating them for these kinds of things is just the wrong way to go about it. But AK, my child's difficult. My daughter just can't. I mean, it's just she's out of control or whatever, you know. Well, yeah, I think there's a lot to be discussed. But again, I'm not trying, it's not about ADHD. I think the wrong way to go about it is labeling these things as some mental sickness. I believe, and what's not connected here is I'm not saying people with ADHD are evil. That was kind of separate. I did shift just to the problem of the whole concept of mental illness. So going back to what we were talking about with people like the shooter, that's just becoming callous. I have never seen where this mental illness concept comes into play. Now, I'm not denying that everything they call mental illness, I'm not saying that none of it can be a disease. ADHD isn't a disease. I'm saying these concepts do not help us in any such way. You know, someone was asking earlier about, what about chemical imbalance? There's no such thing as a chemical imbalance. Do yourself a favor. Just go to Google. I may just do it here, right? And we're about to sign off here, but all you got to do yourself a favor, go to Google and type something to the effect of chemical imbalance myth or cause of mental disorders, and you'll be surprised at what you find out is not really real. Okay, now let's see. Now here's the first thing I get from AI. I don't know how AI works, but it is the first thing that comes up. It says the chemical imbalance myth. Okay, what are we doing here? Let's see. Now, how come that is not showing up? Well, I got it on the wrong screen, I guess. Okay. Yeah. Okay, the chemical imbalance myth. The notion that mental health conditions such as depression are caused by chemical imbalance in the brain is a widely held but outdated belief. No evidence of an imbalance. Studies have not found consistent evidence of chemical imbalances in the brain of people with mental health conditions. The brain is a complex system with billions of neurons and neurotransmitters. It is unlikely that a single chemical imbalance could cause such a multifaceted disorder as depression. Do your own research. They're actually defining what a chemical balance is nearly impossible. The chemicals of the brain are in constant flux. I believe that's all a myth. But our time has come to an end here. I just want to summarize this by saying, number one, I have found that the mental health concept and terminology is unhelpful, especially when it comes to evil acts like what we've been talking about with mass murders and whatnot. There's just people that are evil, that have grown cold in their heart, that have lost the ability to feel compassion. They are self-absorbed. Transgenderism has been the epitome of being self-absorbed. I'm not saying all transgender people are going to be killers. I'm saying the self-absorption and narcissism of transgenderism is unhealthy, leads to further problems, and it is this kind of thing that can lead to a lack of care for others. The very essence of it is to be so concerned about yourself that you have to have other people tell you that you are something that you're not. Also, that the mental health issue is not helpful in cases like ADHD, which has I'm not saying it has anything to do with the evil thing. I'm saying just an example where the labeling, the terminology is unhelpful. It's full of myths and doesn't do us any good. I don't believe in a chemical imbalance. I don't believe really you know what that is. Do your own research on those things. Really what we're dealing with is going back to the evil and the murderous acts of these people, or even transgenders who are not murderers. I am not saying if you're transgender, you're going to be a killer or you have no care for kids. Although in many cases that is the situation, especially with all these people trying to, and it is, all these transgender advocates and people themselves who are trying to transition children, and the people that would take their children to these gay pride parades with the things that are on display, or take their children to drag shows for kids and infants. Yeah, there is a lot of, so while I'm not saying they're all killers, and they're certainly not, so much of it breeds a lack of care for others, and especially children, the sexualization of children. I won't be surprised if this gets yanked from YouTube, but it'll be on the podcast platforms. So, anyway, I appreciate you guys. I appreciate you coming on at this unusual time for us to do this. Yeah, not everybody agrees with my ADHD thing, and that's okay. I don't have time to talk about all the other things. People asking about schizophrenia and stuff. Well, different discussions for a different time. I'm sorry we don't have more time, but I do appreciate you coming on here. Remember, this is available on various podcast platforms. Do your own research, especially when it comes to the link that we make of mental illness and these evil acts. You need to study it from the Bible, having a scriptural perspective. All right, everybody. God bless you all. Have a good day.